Welcome back. Um, it's a great pleasure to be here. I'm very thankful, to Andrea for initiating this whole thing, and then, of course, to Marco, who was a pleasure to have at Michigan. It was great to meet Paolo, and so it was really, as Andrea was saying earlier, an incredible learning opportunity, not just for me, but for our whole group, and one that hopefully is not, that this, while this wraps up Marco's Marie Curie Fellowship, hopefully it does not wrap up our collaboration, and that there is things in the future for all of us. So I thought that as a way to introduce the afternoon session and sort of also as a broader commentary to what has been said this morning, I could perhaps offer a sort of long-term perspective on the issue of the digital analysis of archaeological stratification, as probably befits someone like me, who at this point hails from a time when computer screens were green and C had no pluses. It was just C. There was a time when C was just C. Imagine that. So, in complex societies, especially, we have, of course, what we, the frequent appearance of what we call pluristratified multi-phase sites that present fairly specific and fairly distinctive problems when it comes to the analysis of the sequence. And so as soon as this, old-timey colonial world was fortunately left behind, where unskilled workers were simply clearing out the architecture, the analysis of these sequences was soon recognized as a problem that archaeologists had, and it was in many ways, and still is, I would argue, an unsolvable problem. Like, you cannot produce today any more than you could, at this, in the time of the colonial excavations, but you cannot really produce a one-to-one model of an existing sequence. You can approximate in a variety of ways, but this goal, which maybe shouldn't even be a goal in any case, but it's something that even if we wanted that, it would not be feasible. And so in some ways, we have to recognize that we are confronted with the issue of how to approximate an infinitely complex phenomenon, right? Which is not a problem that is unknown to human endeavors. There are a number of, if you go to the Santa Fe Institute, that's all they do, is they approximate complex phenomena, such as a pot of boiling water, for instance. But the question becomes, how do we get there, and what has been done before, and so what kind of heritage we have in terms of the ways in which we think about this, once again, unsolvable problem. Now, as you all know, there has been a time when, in fact, a whole generation or two in the central part of the 20th century, where cross-sections seemed to be the primary answer to this problem, where it would seem that, this is famous cross-section at Jericho by Kathleen Kenyon, that kind of defines once and for all this approach, where you are trying to slide, usually in physical terms. This is a section that was an actual exposure. Other times it can be a composite section. But in any case, you think that that the cross-section is going to be your main guide. and it's going to be the backbone of your efforts at approximating this three-dimensional complexity. And and this lasts, till some. I mean, I'm sorry to say that there are still parts of the Eastern Mediterranean and beyond, which some of the parts that Mortimer Wheeler called the land of archaeological sin, where this approach is still all you have, and wherever you see a lot of gridded trenches, you generally are dealing with this kind of approach still in its unmodified version. But starting in England, famously in the 1970s, there was that big shift. The sort of 90-degree shift from the section to the plan, and suddenly. These are some other examples of a classic, four-sided trench, and then the transition to the single context overlay plan. And this is something that one of the many, many things that we owe to MOLA, the Museum of London Archaeology, used to be MOLA's Archaeological Service. And this is in some ways a Copernican revolution. Suddenly, the primary thing, the sine qua non of archaeological recording, is the context plan. And we take this for granted now, or at least we do, except some superintendents excavations seem to somehow forget that. But this is still our golden standard. An excavation where you do not have single context plans, we tend to, in the kinds of situations that we're typically confronted with, we tend to consider as an incomplete or worse, a really unacceptable excavation. And this has been going on for a long time. Let me state the obvious here. What we're planning here is the top surface of each layer. So we go through a process of identifying each layer and then creating a plan that approximates the three-dimensional extent of its top surface. Now, as we were saying this morning, it used to be that the emphasis was on the XY coordinates, and only the Z would be represented by elevations that would be taken on the plan. This is something that, of course, now has been revolutionized in digital archaeology. So it is in this line of development, around, not quite in the 70s, but a little later, that digital 3D archaeology inserts itself, initially in the form of 2D vectorization and georeferencing of these overlays, pretty much like this one. And then it's only with the spread of photogrammetry that things start to change in a systematic way. This is a classic composite plan, a phase plan that would be, that's the typical result of a combination of multiple overlays of that kind. And so photogrammetry initially, and still, however, in many contexts, appears in the form of whole site photogrammetry at specific points in the excavation sequence. And this is something, there's nothing wrong with it. I'm not trying to argue that this is in any way an unacceptable practice. It's just the way it is done. The site is very nicely cleaned. There are no tools laying around, and a 3D model is created with, from a drone, I presume, in this kind, or something like that. And from a certain point of view, this is an important, allows you to document. It's really kind of the 3D. It's not really a 3D overlay, but but it was really a 3D end of the excavation picture. Originally, there and still today, there is a practice of taking a clean picture of the excavation at the end of an excavation season or in any other notable point in the process of excavation. And this is the 3D version of, and this is really primarily the 3D version of that. This can also take the form of, small scale 3D models of individual features, so such as faces of tombs and stuff of that kind. What you still don't see routinely done, unless, please correct me if that is, you find this to be inaccurate, is a true equation between the overlay and the 3D model. So a process whereby we, instead of producing this, or in addition to producing this, we produce a 3D model of the same object. And not obviously, the primary thing that you need for this to happen is cropping. These are the individual features. So the primary thing that because of course,
Check the registration.
Well, you wouldn't want to miss this. That would be a tragedy.
Actually, it seems. I think it's okay. Okay, yeah. Sure.
No problem. So, as I was saying, what's essential to this process, if that is desirable, and we can discuss this, but if we want photogrammetry to truly supplement and most importantly, to have the same topological properties as an overlay, we need to do a few things, but the main thing we need to do is cropping. So we have to take the raw, if you want, photogrammetry, and crop it to correspond to a specific layer. And this, incidentally, I think that, well, not only you do need this in order to, to really respect the topology that kind of topological model, which is not the ideal, not the only possibility, but it is, kind of sort of a self-consistent way of representing the surface, the sequence. But also, I think it's important here, and here I'm connecting myself to what Cristiano was saying this morning, the issue of interpretation and semantization, I think is the word that he used. Because essentially, as you move from right to left here, among other things, you are introducing inevitably your interpretation, because your delimitation of the SU is by definition an interpretive process, and it's meant to be. And so, this brings back both the element of subjectivity and also the element that I think Cristiano was referring to of, thinking about what you're doing and not just simply mechanically recording stuff, but to say, okay, so this is my raw data collection, but what am I really going to consider as part of this SU and why? And so this often comes with some sort of, especially at the level of the context sheet, some sort of justification or sketch, and where the criteria for the limitation of the SU are discussed. And this is all, if you want, metadata and paradata that is helping contextualize what you are ultimately recording, why you're getting to this particular form of photogrammetry. And so, and also in reference to what Cristiano was saying, this typically works, and certainly that's how it works at Gabi, if the this interpretation and semantization, if we want, of this 3D model happens very close to the excavation of it, because you may want to double check on in the real world, or in any case against the immediate memories of the people involved in the excavation. So again, this process of cropping that, as you are seeing, I'm trying to sell to you guys very hard, has a number of benefits, including the one of forcing us to think about what we're doing and our observer bias. So this will produce necessarily an abstraction of the sequence that is a form, once again topologically, of that phase plan that was created in Barker-Harris system, except that now instead of joining together overlays, you're joining together photo models. Now, as Tyler was saying, in these volumes, it's still hybrid. In fact, this illustrates perfectly the point that that overlays, traditional Barker-Harris overlays, and these cropped photo models are topologically homogeneous. They coexist in the same universe, right? Because they have the same topology, the same, which we can go into, but you know what I'm talking about. Mutually exclusive, contiguous, and all of that. Have all those the same properties that overlays are supposed to have. These crop models also are supposed to have. And from a certain point of view, this is where we are, certainly at Gabi. So, and other people are moving in other directions. So, of course, I'm not claiming that the path that I'm showing here is the only possible path, but it is definitely a path, and a path that has some benefits of internal consistency that we have been, I think, demonstrating at Gabi. So the interesting question here, or one of the many interesting questions, is what lies beyond. Where do we go from here, assuming that this is a place where people other than Gabi want to get? Where would we go beyond that? And certainly for Gabi, this is a question that we're asking ourselves. Gabi is an excavation that from day one had as one of its main goals methodological experimentation and theoretical reflection. So it was never an excavation that was meant to simply apply the same methodology year after year. Each year we ask ourselves, what can we do better? Where we can make improvement? And I think that digital affordances becoming better all the time can allow things to happen. And this is exactly where I see, and that's just my perspective, Marco's work coming in. I really see Marco's work joining the conversation exactly at this point, at the point of asking ourselves, how can we transcend this kind of approximation? And this is clearly exemplified by the fact of considering the layer as a solid object instead of as an interface. And this is something that, this is a convention, because it is a convention that has been prevailing since, the 1970s, if not before. And now for the first time, we're challenging it. Because whether you do this on paper or digitally is the same thing, once again, in terms of topology. The thing is whether you now see the sequence not as a series of sheets on top of one another, where the space between them you consider to be the layer, and instead a series of stacked solids. And here, not only there are all sorts of important repercussions from the calculation of the volume of the layer, which is something that Cristiano has worked on, to many others. So there are not only sort of methodological small benefits to this, but I would like to argue that there is at least the potential for a sort of quantum leap in our ways of representing complex stratigraphic sequence. And so, sorry, here, this is like this, just to say that that phase plan is a better form, is equal and better than the paper phase plan. But this is the paradox that we were originally confronted with. In this beautiful illustration from Storia della Terra, we are confronted with the profound issue that we see section drawings, we see skins, topmost skins of layers, but we don't know, and we don't have a very effective way of showing what is happening in between them. And this, and this is really a reminder of how much of an approximation the Barker-Harris system is. It's, for at least for some of us, it's so much second nature that we tend to think, okay, this is obviously the thing to do. And I honestly think that just like democracy is the worst possible form of government, with the exception of all others. So I would say that the Barker-Harris system is the worst possible way of recording a day, with the exception of all others. We don't have anything better than that. But it's not ideal. And I think that, so treating layers as solids, I think this is an element, but also any kind of georeferenced representations of cross sections, for instance, of detailed cross sections like we see here, or other small details. So this is, of course, an illustration from Marco's work. And so to wrap up things quickly, because I'm out of time, you can imagine a future where not only layers are treated as solids, but within these solids live georeferenced details of various kinds. That can be cross sections that can be attached to a certain point in the sequence. They can be details, particular concentrations. Now, of course, we record these but only when they are on the top of the layer. If they are sandwiched between one interface and the other, they become that, question mark that you see. But, there's no reason why especially if we think of layers as solids, there's no reason why we couldn't embed such, sort of intermediate photo models within the body of that layer. And that would contribute to its characterization. And there could be all sorts of other details of that kind, special concentrations, special features. So these would be all things that, instead of having just a question mark between one interface and the next, that question mark isn't resolved. It will always, I believe, be a question mark, but at least it has some elements of information within it, instead of being a total black box. It's a black box where certain elements. And once again, going back to Cristiano's very important point, it's essential to say that no one approximation is automatically the best. Approximations always are functional to a certain approach, to a certain theoretical framework, to a certain set of research questions. And so in terms of that fake neutrality that we've been reacting against, that literature has been reacting against, it's important to say that whatever choices we make in these terms, in terms of this zooming in on individual features of specific layers, that is a profoundly biased choice, necessarily. It will reflect what we're interested in. Are we interested in parts? Are we interested in concentration of metals? Are we interested in changes in the composition of the layer? This will drive because of course we can't record everything, and we shouldn't record everything, but the choice of what we, where we push the envelope will be very much function of where we come from and what our questions are. And this, I believe, can do a lot for our concern that of any kind of neutralization of the process. This will always automatically declare who we are. And so if we focus in on the setting the single context in official and sustainable ways, I think that there is an opportunity to usher in a whole new era in the recording of archaeological sequences. Thank you very much.